is the author of fictional works such as Kronos Rising, Kraken, and Diablo, which, Max, of course, we will be talking about those books before I let you go today. But what really we're here to talk about is the fact that you also look into eyewitness accounts and tie them into some of the old reports of actual sightings of possible sea creatures, sea cryptids, maybe remnant species or things that I think in one of your articles you said they're extinct, but no one told them, right? So, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Shannon. It's a pleasure to get out of my cave once in a while and actually talk to living people.
Right. Yeah, and we were talking before we started recording, but you actually get out quite a bit, and like the ocean and fishing and the water is your passion. And I just have to say that I myself also love fishing, and I guess that totally makes sense because I'm back in Las Vegas, Nevada. Great fishing out here. Yeah, not so much. But I saw on your website that you are a world record holding angler. What sorts of things have you drug up out of the deep?
I do a lot of fishing, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. I think most passionate anglers kind of end up developing like a bucket list, let's say, of fish that you want to tangle with, let's say, while you're here, so to speak. But I've had everything from 12-foot sharks to 600-pound grouper. And it depends on the place. I've seen strange things in freshwater, of course, some of which are still mysterious, but it's great when you have a passion like that because it lets you explore and experience a lot of things. And when you're a writer who writes novels that specialize in marine terror like I do, it also lends itself to being able to portray things very realistically for your readers. Achieving that suspension of disbelief, so to speak, so they feel that they're actually there and experiencing it firsthand. They can smell the salt air and taste the blood and all that good stuff. So
the picture that I saw of you with the massive fish with the greenish tinge, was that the grouper?
That's probably a Goliath grouper. I think that one that's on the site or on social media that's a 400-pound Goliath grouper, also called a Jewfish, and that was caught down in Port Charlotte. We actually caught a lot of them that day. All released alive and unharmed, of course. But it's actually, in my opinion, more dangerous for the angler than the fish. And I'm not just talking about like a strained back or sore arm muscles. I have a guide who actually got bitten by one of those fish while he was taking the hook out, and it removed his entire forearm flexors from his arm.
Oh, God.
And he had to actually duct tape his arm back together. And he said when he got back to the dock, he showed it to his wife and she literally fainted.
Oh my God.
134 stitches. But, when I was pushing that particular fish you're talking about back into the water, cause you don't just, pick up a 400-pound grouper and throw it back in. You kind of have to slide it like a refrigerator, so to speak. Yeah, the fish was so strong that it saw the water coming and it started like squirming toward it like in an S pattern, and then right as it got ready to go over the side, and I can only assume the fish did this deliberately. He clotheslined me with his tail. It was like getting hit by a linebacker.
Man.
Almost broke my leg and dropped me right on the side of the deck. So he got even in the end. It was a good day for him. But yeah, there's some amazing animals out there.
I would have assumed he did it on purpose too. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to help you out here, but the fish is like, yeah, but I'm still going to rib you before I go.
Well, they are a protected species, so we don't want to accrue any $10,000 fines for what.
Oh, that's a big one. Ouch. So how about your background then? I mean, besides the fishing, what got you into writing and looking into sea creatures?
Well, my dad is what you would call a rock hound. So he always had an extensive collection, passion for minerals, but more, and what attracted me was all these fossils that I used to see as a child. I remember him, these enormous megalodon shark teeth he had. We used to have, I think I was the only kid in the neighborhood who had the partial skeleton of a young mammoth sitting on top of the piano covered with a tarp. So you experience these things as a child and getting into things like models, prehistoric life, keeping pets, things of that nature. But originally in school, I was an animator. I used to draw cartoons for a living. And then when I gave that up and worked in other fields, I eventually got into writing. I was writing initially stuff for fishing magazines, outdoor magazines, but my true passion was writing Paleo-Fiction, novels about prehistoric life being around in the present and telling an exciting story to go along with it. So
I was reading on your website, you just mentioned it as well, is some of the fossils that you have. What's one of your favorite fossils that you own?
Well, I always tell people my home office is really like working in a museum. It's like on one wall, there's giant stuffed fish. On another wall, there's tribal masks. And another wall is an enormous collector's case filled with all sorts of stuff. Favorite? I would say lately one of my favorites is I have a huge fang from a Macarotis giganteus, which is a very large saber-toothed cat from Eurasia. And not just because having the fang of a saber-toothed tiger, so to speak, isn't exciting enough. It was actually how I ended up procuring the fossil, because somebody, a dealer who had this, he thought, and he had it for decades, that he had the tooth of a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh my gosh.
He had drilled a hole through the end of it. So there's actually like I'd say a third of an inch hole drilled through the distal end. And he was wearing it around his neck for decades as a pendant. And he thought it was the tooth of a T-Rex. He wanted to sell it to me. I knew right away, based on serrations and everything else, or lack of serrations, shape, etc., that it was definitely not a Rex tooth. I showed images of it to paleontologists or two I knew. They said it was definitely mammalian. I suspected that it was some sort of saber-toothed cat. So I gambled and gave him a few bucks for it. And when I got it back, I was able to confirm what it was. So I got it for a fantastic price. But the story that goes along with it, people are like, why does it have a hole in it? And I explained that some maniac was carrying this thing around his neck for 20 years thinking it was from a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So it's nice.
I just think it's fascinating that it's that big to where he thought it was a T-Rex tooth. I didn't realize there was a larger species out there of saber-toothed tiger. That's really cool.
Oh yeah, this broken off. This is only a partial thing. It's broken off. The portion I have is over 6 inches long, which is about the crown length, crown height, whatever you want to call it, of the Tyrannosaurus to begin with. So yeah, it's a sizable tooth. They had prehistoric cats that weighed over 1,000 pounds, some of them, so.
Yeah, my buddy Jason Pentrell, he sent me a megalodon tooth, and I absolutely love it. And I thought it was a replica at first, and he's like, no, I wouldn't send you a replica. He goes, that's a real tooth. I love the thing. It's
a great hobby to have. And when you have antiquities like that as a conversation piece or for learning tools, I've actually been the mystery speaker at my little girl's school once or twice. And I went in there and I brought in a replica of a very large megalodon tooth from my collection and a replica of a large great white tooth for comparison, and I was able to pass them out to the class and discuss the differences between the animals. And yeah, it's just nice to give kids a hand-on experience like that.
Yeah, it helps things sink in that, hey, these actually were around versus just looking at pictures in books or on a slide.
Were around? What do you mean, were?
Yes, that's right. We need to get into that, huh? All right. So yeah, let's just jump right in here. So all the time, I know that you're on Facebook and I'm on there and you see a lot of these clickbait stories and such. But from what we've seen the news come out with, whether it be on Facebook or, maybe a more trusty site, you see something washed up on the beach, and of course it looks beyond haggard and disgusting, and it's full of rot and decomposition. But have you come across anything that you thought got washed up that did look a little suspicious to sway you that maybe these things really could be out there?
Mean something that I've seen personally or something that I've seen photographs of? Probably,
well, either one. I mean, heck, if you've been present for one, that's even better, but I just assume. So yeah, either one.
I've seen some strange stuff, but I have never come across a carcass that I thought was unusual. The carcass that I would say that was in the news media that would come to mind would be the most suitable for what you were talking about would probably be that one that washed ashore in the Philippines recently.
Is that the one that they said it looked like, quote unquote, a dragon?
It was a large grayish animal and about the size of a whale. It had a large eye. It had a head that looked somewhat reptilian. And interestingly enough, the carcass was taken and towed out to sea and disposed of before it was properly studied. It seems to be the norm that something like this showed up and people are like, all of a sudden it gets whisked away before samples are taken or anything else or a definitive study is done, right, and it's gone. Now I can understand the need for obviously sanitation, sanitary conditions. You don't want something rotting and spoiling the water in your harbor or spreading disease, pestilence, that type of thing. But at the same time, I don't think you should eliminate something right away before it's been definitively studied and samples taken. So there was a lot of conjecture about what that was. And I was approached on social media by someone from the Philippines who claimed that this carcass was actually on his beach. He was saying the pictures that were there that this was his house. It was 20 yards from his door. And he told me this fantastical story, which turned out apparently to be a complete falsehood. But in this fantastical story, he said that he saw this carcass while it was still out in the water. He was the first one there. He swam out to it with scuba gear. He claimed that it had 4 fins, one of which was bitten off, so 3 were only there. He claimed it had teeth like a crocodile in both the upper and lower jaws. And then he said that a bunch of fishermen came and snagged this thing with a huge hook and they dragged it ashore, completely destroying the carcass and whatnot. And then that these people, he made it sound like some sort of Men in Black scenario, showed up, these government people who wouldn't show ID. And they put this carcass on the back of a dump truck, cleaned up any evidence of it, and took it off supposedly to bury it. Well, as it turned out, I got my hands on a bunch more photos of this carcass, and his story did not jibe at all. And I confronted him with this, and then he disappeared. So he was obviously somebody that was just looking for attention and looking to make a little name for himself or something. But I will say that I looked at a lot of photos of this, and I'm not convinced. First of all, I'm not going to say that it was some sort of extinct marine animal or something like that. But at the same time, I do not believe that it is what they claimed it was, meaning that it's a gray whale, or some other purported experts were claiming it was a sperm whale. They said the sperm whale people said that you could see this lower jaw there and the alveoli where the teeth would have been. And they are mistaken. I scrutinized all the photos, even the high definition ones, and anything that would be construed to be a lower jaw is actually a piece of plastic with holes punched in it. It's like there's garbage attached to the carcass, like that it encountered or when it was dragged or what. And saying that it was a gray whale makes no sense because as rotted as this thing is, and they say that it starts to like morph, the flesh moves around and it does this surreal thing. The eye is still there, and the eye is very large. And you can see the outline of the skull. So that's still there, the bone, etc. And the eye is so large, if you compare it, a gray whale's eye, or any whale's eye for that matter, is like a fifth the size of what this thing has. It also appears to have paired nostrils, and the nostrils are not in the proper place to be a baleen whale. So it's a mystery, but I'm not going to read too much into it because obviously without any additional evidence, you really can't say. I just don't believe that people can dismiss it and say it's a gray whale because it doesn't jive with the gray whale's proportions. Eye, blowhole size, location, or anything like that, even with the carcass falling apart like that.
Does anything of the carcass survive to this day, even in whispers, or is it just the pictures?
No, from what I understand, they towed it out to sea and, you go with the tide or whatnot. So, it's unfortunate. I mean, something like that, a a photo of, let's say, something like that, if it did have, for example, teeth in the upper and lower jaw, one photo like that would blow any claims of it being anything else out of the water, even if it was some sort of unknown cetacean, let's say.
Yeah, it's always a shame too, because it seems like a lot of times either there's just no one has a camera on them, which we'll talk about in the upcoming story we're gonna chat on, which was also quite recent. It seems like they're washing up in these places where they really do just drag it back out to sea, and they don't really think of what a big find that really could be for the entire world.
Well, I think people don't want the notoriety or the exposure. There could be a myriad reasons why people want to get rid of something like that. It could be even something from a religious perspective.
All right. Still very frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will make sure to track down that article, everybody, and link that in show notes. I think I vaguely remember coming across that as well. It's from the Philippines, so I'll make sure to link that. So, Max, for you, I mean, I know that you write the fictional stories, but obviously you have a passion into looking into maybe why these things could still be out there, at least a certain remnant of something, a cousin, a second cousin, something. Do you have an argument as to why one of these or more than one species still could be out there?
Well, I think first we've got to take into account the sheer volume of the Earth's oceans. Statistically speaking, and it's a commonplace saying, a platitude at this point, that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about our own oceans. Mm-hmm. And that is 100% true. I believe only 5% of the ocean floor has been mapped at this point. And we're talking the ocean floor, not the miles and miles of ocean above it. So just from a statistical perspective of how much water is out there, the possibilities are endless. New species are discovered daily. And saying that something that size would be seen is ridiculous. That's like having a lake of 10,000 acres with a goldfish in it and saying that, oh, there's no goldfish in this lake because I haven't seen it.
Right.
And meanwhile, you have a limitless amount of water out there. So from let's say a habitat perspective, you've got so much out there. From a perspective of people having seen something like this, you have to keep in mind that, now we're talking about it first, I'll say an air-breathing animal. Most of the sightings out there, other than enormous sharks and enormous squid, of which there are many, but a lot of these so-called sea serpent sightings seem to indicate something that is an air-breathing creature, something that resembles a mosasaur of some kind, a pliosaur of some kind, a snake of some kind, a turtle. These animals would breathe air. So the argument is, well, why don't we see them if they have to come to the surface? And then you say to yourself, well, how much, first of all, surface are we dealing with, number one? Number two, when a large air-breathing animal comes to the surface that is whale-like in build, it is going to be like a whale, meaning it will appear as one. Mm-hmm. So if you had a large mosasaur, for example, type animal, 50, 60 feet long or more, it comes to the surface, it doesn't stick its head up out of the water, wave a flipper at you and say, hi, I'm Maisie Mosasaur and here I am. This animal is a predator. Predators are naturally a bit on the stealthy side. It's going to surface, it's going to take air, and it's going to submerge again. So if you're hundreds of feet away from this thing, and it's most likely not going to surface right next to you, what are you going to see? A mound of its back, the top of its head, a little bit of blackness, it spouts, and then it's gone again. So that's a factor right there. And then there's the factor that a lot of these sightings took place more during the so-called age of sail. I would think that most predators, like let's take great white sharks, for example. Great white sharks are size oriented when it comes to dominance, meaning that if a 15-foot great white is cruising along and a 20-foot great white comes toward it, the smaller animal automatically makes way or even flees because it's in danger of being attacked by a larger predator. So the same thing theoretically would take place if you're any size animal and all of a sudden you've got 50,000 tons of ocean liner headed your way. A lot of animals are going to look at that and just get out of dodge. And you've got the size of the ship, you've got the noise of the motors, the engines, and everything that goes with it. It's enough to chase most creatures far and far away.
Well, they could probably hear that, I suppose, because water is such a great conductor. They can probably hear that for miles.
Yeah, sound travels 4 times faster through the water than it does through the air. So that's always a factor. And any creature that's adapted to marine life is going to have senses that blow ours or even a submarine's out of the water.
Well, that does lend credence to what you said about the age of sail before motors were invented, and were a thing for any ship, even large or small. Then they wouldn't hear it coming as much and more chances to see something. Definitely.
But there's also the complaint about why we don't see carcasses or why carcasses don't wash ashore. And now this is going to go along the lines of first off talking about something of a reptilian nature, but marine reptiles consume stomach stones, gastroliths. This is a known fact, an established and documented fact, and these are used for both buoyancy, to reduce buoyancy, and to aid in digestion. They have rocks in their stomachs that they swallow deliberately. Crocodiles do that as well. When a crocodile is shot by a hunter, which happens all the time, the crocodile will sink when it dies. So the same thing most likely would take place with any type of large marine predator that had gastroliths in its digestive system. The animal loses the air that's in its lungs when it dies, and the body is going to sink to the bottom. What happens when a body sinks to the sea bottom? It gets rots and it gets eaten. So that 5% of the sea floor that we've actually studied is going to make it a little difficult to find a carcass or something that's being torn to pieces by sharks and other scavengers until there's nothing left.
Yeah, I would assume on the bottom of the ocean it would go, you would only guess at the number 10 times or 20 times faster than if it would float and bloat and sit on the top of the water, right? To the birds and maybe some of the sharks come to the surface. Yeah. I didn't think about that with the rocks, with the alligators. I've heard that before. I wouldn't have assumed that the air breathers in the ocean would do the same thing, but that makes sense.
Well, try to be sensible once in a while.
Yeah, we have to try to go there once in a blue moon, right? Okay, so in these articles that we're going to talk about that were on your website, and what's your website, by the way?
The website is based on the Cronus Rising book series, so it's just Cronus with a K, cronusrising.com. And under the blog there's lots of different articles on prehistoric life and also a couple interviews I've done based on some sightings.
Yeah, that way people can go, and if they want to zip over that website while we're chatting, they can do that, and you can see these articles we're about to talk about. The two different creatures that you bring up in these articles, I want to just talk about the difference between the two and if there is any plausibility that either one of these guys could still be around before we get into the context of these sightings that you've come across and got to speak to somebody who had a first-hand sighting. So the pliosaur and the mosasaur are two creatures that you bring up in these articles. And I just wanted to, like I said, just talk about the difference between the two size-wise, maybe behavioral, what we know so far about them, and which one, if either one, could still be around.
Well, we'll start with pliosaurs then, which is my personal favorite, at least in terms of, according to the primeval protagonist, let's say, in my series. But, pliosaurs were assorted sizes, but they were large apex predators by and far, from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous time periods. They were a type of plesiosaurs, type of plesiosaur that did not have a long neck, but instead they had a short neck and a large triangular skull like a crocodile. So they would be what they call a pliosauromorph or pliosauridae. They had, if you picture, let's say, a crocodile, but with a very short tail and 4 large flippers instead of legs, then that would sort of give you an approximation of what a pliosaur would look like. They were predators. We don't know if they lived in pods or packs or whatnot, but they were supremely well adapted for marine life. They were active hunters, very fast swimmers, and they got quite large. So far, it appears that the minimum size for these creatures in terms of what they reached was around 60 feet in length. Mm. And that would be a very large animal because approximately a fifth of that length, maybe more, was head. So they had a very large skull filled with teeth like ridged bananas, very powerful jaws, and they were able to basically almost bite other creatures in half. Mm. So but they, as far as we know, went extinct around 90 million years ago, which is when their main food supply, the ichthyosaurs, which were like lizard-like dolphins, let's call them, they all died out. And it looks like the pliosaurs followed along afterward. Upon their extinction, a type of marine lizard called a mosasaur, and there were various species, became the dominant predator of the Cretaceous seas. Mosasaurs were descended from monitor lizard-like animals and snakes, and they adapted for marine life. Unlike a pliosaur, they would be more crocodile-like in shape, meaning they had a long tail, but they were also adapted as marine life forms. They had relatively smooth skin with very small scales. They had a crocodile-like head with teeth that curved backwards. They also were interesting in that they had rows of teeth in the upper jaw and the palate. We'll call them palate teeth, that these two rows of teeth that were hooked backwards so that when something was starting to be swallowed, it was definitely going down the hatch and couldn't get away. Their jaws would disconnect like a snake's. They could flex. They had hinges in the jaws, let's say, like that. Mm. And they had long tails, which we now know ended in a caudal fin like a shark's tail, but inverted. So they propelled themselves like a shark, maybe like a blue shark or a tiger shark or something like that, very quickly through the water. They also had 4 fins, but unlike the pliosaurs, which had very large flippers, which propelled them, the mosasaurs' flippers would have been more for steering and stabilization, let's say, in the water, with their propulsion actually coming from the tail. Mosasaurs were also large. We know that they reached around 60 feet in length, although they would not have been as massive because that 60 feet, about half of it was tail. And they lived up until, at a minimum, the end of the Cretaceous period, which is interesting because they were growing steadily at that time. Mosasaurs were getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the Cretaceous went along, and they seemed to be active predators on sharks. To the point that the large sharks that lived in the Cretaceous, like Rhytoxorhina, were all gone before the Cretaceous ended, which apparently was from active predation by mosasaurs. The question, of course, would remain then, if mosasaurs did not go extinct, let's say at the end of the Cretaceous, and if they managed to hang on some sort of vestigial population, would they have continued to increase in size as time went on?
That's interesting. So is there a thought that maybe they decreased? Because, I mean, we don't have the megalodons or anything nearly that big anymore for them to munch on. So could they, reverse the growing period and maybe that's why they could still be around?
I think we would experience the opposite, actually, because what happened is the larger animals that took over and began to evolve were whales. And whales got bigger and bigger and bigger. And feeding on a marine animal like a cetacean, which would be an incredibly rich source of calories in terms of blubber and protein, etc., would actually do the opposite. You would need an animal that was big enough to prey on these steadily increasing cetaceans, the steadily increasing size of cetaceans, even if it was feeding on the calves, let's say, and mosasaurs would have swallowed their prey whole for the most part, with a few possible deviations, let's say. But if you're going to swallow whole, let's say, a 15-foot whale calf, you would have to have a substantial size about you to be able to do that.
Good point.
So it's most likely that this animal, if it was still around, would have actually grown in size. And I'll say something else. The evolution of the megatoothed sharks, which occurred after the Cretaceous extinctions, we're talking not just megalodon, but the ones that came before it, these sharks were gradually getting bigger and bigger and bigger, reaching from 30 feet in length to 40 feet to 50 and possibly pushing 60 feet. Then to compete with these other predators, it would also require a mosasaur type creature to grow as well. It would evolve because if to avoid being preyed upon by a megatoothed shark of whichever species, or to prey on them, it itself would have also gotten bigger and bigger.
So I wonder why Discovery Channel glamped onto, well, besides mermaids, which they got hammered on for that, but also they did the old megalodon, right? It's back, it's here, it hasn't left. Why wouldn't they maybe go for something a little bit more believable, like a mosasaur, and do one of those? I can't remember what they called that. What do they call that? A docudrama, whatever that was, right, about the megalodon.
I thought they called them the mockumentaries instead of
mockumentary. That's what it is. Yeah, I was going docudrama, and that's not quite it. Yeah, mockumentary. That's it.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to say that there can't still be some relic population of megatooth shark out there. I mean, the super predator is something, whether it's a mosasaur or some sort of shark species or whatnot. But I think they wanted to focus on what was in vogue, and megalodons are known to have died out only a couple million years ago, or believed to, whichever the case may be, depending on which camp you're in. So it wouldn't be too big of a stretch to push that as an agenda in terms of, let's say maximum appeal. A lot more people know about the megalodon shark with all the mega shark movies and such out there than they do about mosasaurs, although Jurassic World obviously changed that, so.
Yeah, that special dino they came up with was pretty amazing, so. Max, with the plesiosaur and the mosasaur, at any time in their lifespans, and even with them changing, were they always in the water 100% of the time, or did they ever come up on land?
I don't think a mosasaur would do very well if it was beached because, it's not impossible. Orcas, for example, are known to beach themselves while catching seals and then are able to squirm and thrash themselves back into the water. But at the same time, we know when a shark gets beached, like even a great white, it's usually game over.
Right.
A mosasaur does not have as far as we know, the torso musculature, let's say, of an orca. I would think if a mosasaur found itself beached, it would probably be in trouble. I don't know. It may have a squirming ability to do a snake-like thing that could be beneficial. Maybe it could get back into the deeper water, with no problem. I would think that a plesiosaur of at least small and medium size would probably do better in terms of being able to come ashore because it had those four large flippers and the powerful musculature that power them, that it could do the sea turtle thing and squirm and push itself ashore. I think that with the larger animals, if you have something that weighs 15, 20, 30 tons or more, I don't think that would be a possibility. I think it would probably end up beached like one of the great whales and probably breathe its last. So, but it's possible something the size of a sea lion, a plesiosaur that size, let's say, could probably come ashore quite handily. In fact, that would have been a defensive measure that they used if they were being pursued by a larger predator.
Right.
If you have a 50-foot pliosaur on your heels trying to make a snack out of you, and you're a 10-foot, let's say, Cryptoclitus, which is one of the medium-length plesiosaur types, it could probably have beached itself and came ashore and escaped its predator and then came back into the water when it was safe. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Can you imagine seeing something like that? You're just fishing away and up plops a mosasaur just chilling out. Like, what?
Oh, I'd be pouncing on him and trying to drag him.
You're right.
Get the camera! I got him! Like hitting my leg, and I'm like, hurry up, take the picture!
Take the picture and then let it back in the water. It must procreate.
Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
We always knew Max would go out like that.
Well, when you're a fisherman, that's you'd be happy, Just like you said, just get it on camera. I'm always laughing about that. I'm like, hey, if something bad happens to me, it's in the paranormal realm or the cryptid realm. You know, Sasquatch uses me as a Louisville Slugger against a tree. Hey, it's just meant to have and get a camera though.
Well, like I started to mention to you one time, I had this past March an astonishing sighting from my car, both me and my little girl. But it was such a quick thing. You know, reaching for a camera was the last thing on my mind. I was so astonished by what I was looking at. You know, if I'd had a dash camera, then it would have been game on. But, you know, you come home, you draw real quickly what you saw and whatnot and commit it to memory, you know, but I've never spoken about it, nor will I today because it was so fantastical that I myself don't believe it. But there are things out there that will blow people's minds when they see them. So sometimes a camera, you just, you know, you're like,
right.
Oh my God, it, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
You know, so it happens.
I had that written down, so that was going to be my question. But hey, if you ever change your mind and you want to come on and talk about it, no, that's really cool.
Well, my media guys, they told me they felt that because my specialty is marine life, writing Paleo-Fiction about prehistoric marine life, that type of thing, and that's my area of expertise or supposed expertise, we'll say. They felt that the story was so fantastical that people would think that I was just looking for attention or that it was so unrelated that it just didn't make sense to even cover it.
Right.
Yeah, so, but maybe for a follow-up show, I have to give it some thought. I don't want some unwanted attention.
Oh yeah, no. And no pressure, of course. I totally understand. I get where they're coming from.
It was a mind-blowing experience, okay? And I will, as a little teaser, you know, like I said, I'm far from committed to doing anything talking about this, but this creature, it had wings. Let's just put it that way.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh God, I thought we were going for a big, it was a, you know, maybe more of closer to a Bigfoot story. I had no idea. Holy cow. It had wings.
This thing could fly and, it had wings and it blew my mind. So anyway, but onward and up.
My goodness. Well, how am I going to go forward after hearing that? Was it, okay, can you just tell me this? Was it taller than you?
No.
Okay.
The wingspan was about 3 to 4 feet.
Oh gosh, still. Oh my God. Okay. All right. I'll let it go. I'm going to move on now. A little tough to do. little distracted. Okay. So let's talk now about some of the sightings. And I don't know if you want to just jump right into the Carnival Cruise monster or if there's some other ones. Now we'll get to the 1852, of course. That's in there to be covered. But besides those two, are there any others that you've looked into or that you've come across that are really, like you said, like fantastical sightings that you really think might have some credence to them?
Well, the more you dig, the more you find. And some of these sightings go back a long time. I mean, let's see, I got a nice little list for you here, but so let's focus on sort of like mosasaur-like creatures, because I came to the conclusion that what the witness spotted swimming next to this liner can only have been, at least based on known possibilities, some sort of enormous mosasaur type animal. But I found one, for example, there's been a lot around New Zealand. One goes back 1899, and a officer from a steamship by the name of Lindsay Kerr spotted what he described as an enormous conger eel, but with fins, one on each side of the body, and this thing was giant. It breached out of the water and 30 feet of it came out of the water. And he described it as having had a head that was very crocodilian in appearance. You've got in 1971, this is also New Zealand, a ship called the Kompira Maru saw a quote bug-eyed monster which resembled a large crocodile but with fins instead of legs. That they saw 1972, 3 women off the Aurora River near Temuka. They saw a light gray quote lizard-like beast that was around 15 meters. That's 50 feet long, which at one point opened its mouth I guess, threaten them, revealing a lot of sharp teeth. And it goes on and on and on. There is one of the more interesting ones. This is pretty recent, is in 1999. And this took place off of the coast of Norway. And you have a witness who saw an animal that was approximately 90 feet long.
Oh my God. And
he described this thing as having like a 15 or 16 inch fin that started near the back of its head and ran down the length of its body. And this creature was feeding on a whale carcass in a fjord off the coast of Norway. And he said that its head resembled an anaconda, but kind of broad at the snout. And he described this thing as grabbing this whale carcass and dragging it further and further away from shore at, quote, quite a speed. He said he was astonished at strength and agility. And he observed two of these creatures feeding on the carcass.
Whoa.
Disturbance of them. Apparently they were trying to tear pieces out of it, etc. And this is a very large animal. He described it as being brown along its entire back. Along the sides, it turned to a lighter brown color, and he didn't see the belly, obviously, because it was in the water. And he was, at this point, when it was feeding, he said it was a good 200 meters offshore. They actually, reportedly, there is a video of this, but we've been unable to track it down. And that's, that video would be astonishing to see. He was watching it through binoculars. There is a still of it on the site, but it doesn't really show you much. But the point is it was a very, very large animal that was able to take hold of a whale carcass and pull the carcass further out to sea into deeper water so that it could comfortably feed. So I would assume that it tracked the carcass by scent, dragged it out to sea in deeper water more suitable for it based on its size, and then it and possibly its partner in crime or mate, or I don't know if these type of creatures would travel in groups, but proceeded to feed on the carcass. So there are more recent sightings of this, and obviously the incident with the whaling vessel, of course, is the most well documented, let's say, of this. So, but did you want to touch on that first, or did you want to actually talk about what was seen by the ship?
Going back to that Norway sighting, though, it's cool to hear that there was two of them. That he says that he saw two of them. That kind of gives you hope that they are procreating and maybe making their way out there.
Yeah, but I mean, these animals, and I'm going to go out on the limb and say that they must exist if so many people are seeing them and reporting it, et cetera. But, I mean, there's reports by Russian whalers of these things, sometimes 100 or more feet long, that have been seen harassing, chasing pods of whales, a lot of times in colder climes. I mean, well, the southern Indian Ocean, the Arctic, they have different names for them. It seems like they're confirmed whale eaters or predators that, like I was talking earlier, have evolved to specialize in feeding on whales. You know, I could picture this. I mean, if you're a mosasaur-like animal, let's say 100 feet long, you're big enough to swallow a whale calf. You probably don't want the adults, unless it's a rotting carcass, in which case, you know, ripping chunks out of it is a little easier. Also, let's be realistic. A full-grown whale is not going to exactly roll over and say, you know, come take a bite out of me. But at the same time, chasing down a pod, harassing it like orcazoo or even giant squid have been known to feed on whale calves, with the parent apparently being unable to protect the calf, especially a baleen whale. But it wouldn't surprise me that a large mosasaur or even a pliosaur type animal would go after a calf and harass a pod until it was able to get in there and try and take one down, and it could swallow a calf whole. That'd be a great meal.
Yeah. And this gentleman in Norway, he was on shore with a pair of binoculars, right? He didn't have a bird's eye view of any kind. He was at level with them, basically.
It says here that he was going for a walk along the fjord near the town of, I'm going to mispronounce this because I don't speak Norwegian, Ålesund. On the northwest coast of Norway, he saw this strange creature swimming from the left parallel to the shore. It appeared to be about 90 feet long. He described its dorsal fin and watched it for about 10 minutes before he decided to run home for his video camera. And then he saw it creating a powerful wake as it moved toward a floating whale carcass, which was out in the fjord. He described it as looking like an anaconda, but much, much bigger, swimming on the surface of the water, keeping its head submerged. He said the head was as thick as its neck, and it looked like a gigantic serpent's head. No obvious neck. The color obviously being brown, lighter brown on the sides. Then he got into how it started dragging the carcass further out the shore. At this point, it was 600 feet from shore, and he was astonished as to its strength and its agility. He was able to observe vertical undulations as it was feeding, and there were two animals feeding on the whale carcass from opposite angles, so I guess opposite sides. So one was on one side, one was on the other. That could be construed to be a cooperative effort, because if one was tugging one way and the other,
right.
one was tugging the other, that would make it easier for them to be able to rip bites off. There's only a couple of mosasaurs that had the capacity for being able to do that type of ripping, let's say in a large carcass, which would include Mosasaurus hoffmanni, which had larger, more powerful jaws, larger recurved teeth, and the sheer mass to be able to do that. That was I believe is the largest known species of mosasaur, and was the most massive of the animals. I mean, a 60-foot Mosasaurus hoffmanni would probably weigh in at around 30 tons on a guess. And if it got bigger, obviously, it would be substantially heavier.
I can't imagine seeing something like that, but imagine that poor guy is out in a boat, and then he sees that, right? You'd be like, well, I have no shot if they have any interest in me.
Imagine if you're a scuba diver.
Oh, my God.
Or something, and,
yeah.
Oh, my God, it's real!
Yeah, you don't think you'd be going back in the water, much like what Jaws did to the public back when it came out. I don't remember the year, but old Steven Spielberg really scared the pants off everybody, and the scuba pants too, and they're like, I'm good about going in the ocean for a little while.
Well, you would certainly, if you were a diver, whether, you could be a spear fisherman, an abalone diver, whatever it might be, if you encounter a predator like that in the water, the odds are you're not going to come back to tell the tale.
Right. I agree.
There's a known sighting from World War I by a U-boat captain named Forstner, who torpedoed a ship, the steamer called the Iberian, and after that ship sank, and it must have been toting munitions, it exploded underwater, and a lot of debris came to the surface with the explosion, and also a 60-foot animal was thrown 100 feet into the air. And this animal was described as being a crocodile in shape, but with a long pointed tail and 4 flippers instead of legs. So this animal would have been, I hate to say it, but feeding on dead and dying sailors. Mm-hmm. It was just circling the hull and cherry picking meals, and then got caught in the explosion and blown out of the water. So, assuming that Forstner's report was accurate, loud bangs like that would be like the dinner bell for these things. Yeah. Every time you have a war, torpedoes, etc., you're attracting these predators. And it makes sense. I mean, I've known shark captains that go out on charters, and if it's taking a while for, let's say, a blood trail or a chum slick to bring sharks to the boat, they'll start lighting M80s and chucking them into the water. And these loud explosions, like you were talking about earlier, that sound travels 4 times faster in the water, and that thump is going to radiate from miles and miles and miles. It's going to draw predators in. They know that there's something there, whether they think it's, I don't know, an underwater rock slide that might have killed some animals, to icebergs colliding, who knows what. To them, it's the possibility of an easily purloined meal. They're going to explore that. And then you put a blood trail in the water on top of it, they're going to come running.
That's interesting. I've never heard that about the M80s to bring the big guys in. That's really cool.
Oh, it works. Believe me. They come in fast.
Really?
Yeah, you don't want to be in the water when that happens. And they're looking to feed. Even blue sharks, which actually, I believe a lot of the poor sailors that when the Indianapolis was torpedoed, a lot of the sailors that were killed and eaten by sharks, blue sharks, took a lot of them.
Yeah, I don't think that wouldn't be a very good way to go. And to know exactly what's happening to you after you've already survived a ship sinking or whatever the situation was. That's terrible.
Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of men were killed from that.
Yeah. And no way to protect yourself in a situation like that. You can only punch so many sharks in the nose or the eyes, right?
I'm tempted to start doing one of my Quint lines from Jaws, but I'm going to spare you.
Right. Gotta love Quinn, man. All right. Well, what do you think, Max? You want to take it back to the 1850s, or would you like to start with the Carnival Cruise monster?
I think the 1850s makes sense to touch on simply because it's such an impressive accounting and what, the date seems to vary from reports to reports. I've heard it from January 13th of 1851 to January 13th of 1852.
Oh.
You know, the story changes in the telling, and I'd really love to see the original captain's documents, which are preserved. But a whaling ship called let me see if I can pronounce this because I always mess it up. I
love this word. I don't know where they came up with it, but yeah.
It's a Native American term. I think it's the name of a river, but it's the Monongahela. So this is a whaling ship from the mid-1800s, which encountered and purportedly killed a, quote, sea serpent or sea monster. And there have been a lot of accountings of the story, but by and large, the details that stay the same is that the whaler encountered what they described as a sea serpent, a very, very large animal that was on the surface. And when they approached this creature, they described it as having two spouts that seemed to come from the front of its head, which seemed to differ from a baleen whale, for example, and they said it was not a sperm whale. And they said when they saw it, they described its head as looking like that of an enormous alligator. The creature was blackish or blackish brown, dark brown on the top, lighter brown on the sides, and they did eventually see its underside, which were brownish and whitish underneath, which would make sense. Counter shading is traditional for most predators, great white sharks and a lot of others. When they approached this thing, and I think that this is why they were able to harpoon this creature. They said that it was still in the water and then it was thrashing here and there, and it appeared to be in a lot of pain or it was suffocating. So this animal may have been dying already. When we get into the description of its carcass after they killed it, and they did kill it, the abdomen was extremely distended. So it may have had internal injuries from something. I mean, who knows what? Cancer even, God forbid. But it was either dying or in a very bad way, badly injured when they came across it, which is what enabled them to approach it. The animal, they got close enough to it that they were able to put two harpoons into it, at which point then it attacked the boats. They put down whaling boats. You've seen Moby Dick, right? Mm-hmm. So basically the main ship, the whaling vessel, would put down these lifeboat-sized boats with a lot of people rowing. They would get close enough to the whales to put one or two harpoons in them. The whales would run, and they would basically be dragging the whale boats behind them in what's called a Nantucket sleigh ride. Mm-hmm. And these whale boats dragging them along would eventually exhaust the whale. It would come to the surface, and then they would get close enough to put what they call a lance through the whale's harder lungs, and they would kill the whale. Then they would tow it back to the boat and chop it up, process it, strip its blubber, convert it to whale oil, etc. So basically, they put two harpoons into this creature, and then the sea serpent, as they described it, attacked the whaling boats. People were thrown overboard, including the captain. One of them put a lance through the creature's eye, almost like it impaled itself as it was trying to strike at them. This did not kill the creature, so obviously it didn't go into its brain. And then the animal took off. It started taking line, as Quinn would say, taking a hell of another line.
There was.
Yes, and eventually it had, let me see, I'm going to have to check notes on this thing, but it had, I believe, 6,000 feet of line out. 4 boats were, because they interconnected them. And the animal, while this was going on, they were tying casks and stuff like floating barrels behind it which made it more difficult for this creature to swim. It's like you've seen on those science documentaries where they would get a great white shark to grab bait with a hook in it, and then they'd have those giant floating barrels behind it to exhaust the shark until they could hoist it up on a weigher, a scale, floating scale next to the ship, and then get a weight on it. So the same type of thing. They're having this thing towing barrels, like in Jaws, for example, the harpoons, and this would exhaust the creature further. The interesting part of it is at this point, they thought that this creature had submerged 6,000 feet down. And it was down there for different accounts, but 16 hours is usually what's considered, at which point it came back to the surface and they thought it was dead. And I'll get to that in a second. I don't believe that it was down 16 hours because this was an air-breathing animal. Mm-hmm. And it could not have survived 16 hours without without oxygen. So, but at the same time, if this animal takes out 6,000 feet of line, which is over a mile, they're not going to see it when it comes up for air or anything like that. You probably had just a huge bow in the line where the line was pulled underwater and the weight of it was on this creature, et cetera. And eventually it was brought, let's say, to the surface or to the boat. They thought it was dead. They approached it to make sure, lanced it again. This time they put a lance into it looking to kill it, putting it lance into its lungs or heart. And so they spear the animal, and then it, of course, was not dead at this point. And it was flailing and thrashing and whatnot until it eventually died. This confirms that it was not underwater for 16 hours and dead. Initially I thought when I was reading the account, I thought the creature had died and the body was underwater, and eventually it came to the surface and they pulled it in hand over hand, the line. But that's not what happened. So the animal must have been at the surface in the distance, and eventually it was dying or near death. And then when they harpooned it, it thrashed its last and it gave up the ghost, so to speak. One interesting point is that when they found it at that point, they said it had a lot of organic matter next to it. They thought it had spewed up its lungs or what. There were organs in the water, long organs. And that was an interesting part of the tale because I don't believe that it coughed up its lungs, so to speak. But I have been shark fishing, for example, where a shark will actually throw up its own stomach. Wow. In an effort to dislodge the hook that is in its gullet or something. And the shark will do that because it's trying to expel that hook. So you'll actually have a shark flailing around in the water next to your boat. And I've got photos of this. And that's what it's trying to do. When the hook is removed and the line is cut, the shark is released, the shark will re-ingest its own stomach. Wow. So most likely when this creature was lanced, it spewed up its own guts, its stomach, trying to expel the hook, or in this case, the harpoon head, which probably butchered the stomach. And that makes sense. It's appropriate for this type of scenario, which is one of the things that makes the accounting so believable. So at this point, though, the animal is now dead. They bring it back to the ship and they start doing what they do to a whale. They started, I'll call it dissecting it, taking an accounting of what they had, etc. And they had a lot of fascinating details. Did you want to interject anything before I keep rambling?
No, go right ahead. Yeah, I like the rambling. And now, the stats of the creature are absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, the animal, first off, they said it was a male. And that killed off one of my theories that perhaps the animal was gravid and was trying to give birth if it was a female. And that was why it was on the surface and so immobile and in so much pain. It was having difficulties, but apparently not, because the accountings all said it was a male, and obviously they knew why. This creature was almost 104 feet long, and then they had all the accurate measurements of different parts of its anatomy. 19 feet 1 inch around the neck, so figure a neck that's over 6 feet thick. 24 feet 6 inches around the shoulders, which would have been around where the fore flippers were, let's say, which now you're talking about a body that's probably 6 or 7 feet high, like the net, neck, 8 to 10 feet across if you looked at it from the above, from above. And interestingly, the fullest part of the body, in which they said looked distended, it was 49 feet 4 inches around the belly region. And this is what leads me to believe this animal might have been extremely sick and or suffering from some sort of cancer, who knows what. I mean, alligators, when they're killed and they hoist them up, the belly is distended, but that seems double the diameter of the shoulder region. So unless all of its guts, when they were hoisting it up, if they had it, on a yard arm or something like that, sank down, which does happen with some types of sharks, like tiger sharks, it may have had some issues of a gastrointestinal nature or something. The head was described as being long and flat with ridges on it, which sounds very reptilian. I've heard different variants of the head being 10 or even 15 feet long, and it said the bones of the lower jaw were separate. Now this is one of the facts that makes it sound more mosasaurish, because mosasaurs have these hinges in their lower jaw that enable them to swallow very large prey items whole. They said it was like a snake's, where it was able to open very wide. And that's an interesting fact. And the tongue had like a heart-shaped tip. It was described as having there was a couple of other interesting points. I mean, they talked about the blubber, which was like a whale's, but 4 inches thick, although it burned into a clear oil. They said that burnt like as fast as turpentine. The body was very difficult to break down. They brought the head on board to preserve it. And they talked about all different things. The bones were described as being blackish. The stomach contained chunks of squid and a very large partially digested blackish fish. They described its teeth. And this is one of the things that gets a little off, because there's variance on this story. And like I said, I'd really love to read the captain's original accounting and find out. One accounting says it had 88 teeth. Another says 94 teeth. I don't know if they're including teeth that it might have had on the palate or not. The teeth were very sharp, and there's different descriptions of size, etc., but as large as a man's thumb above the gum line, and the teeth were pointed backward into the mouth. Now, most accounts say that. One account says that, which was not by the captain, I believe, it said that it had canine-like teeth in the front, or incisors, let's say, that were pointed and curved, and then it had teeth further back that were broad and serrated. And that sounds more like a prehistoric whale called a basilosaurus, of course. So there seems to be some conflict in terms of that part of the story. They all said it had 4, quote, swimming paws, which were like lumps of hard, loose flesh. The joints in its back were very loose. It seemed to be able to move like an S-like motion for swimming. That seems to be a uniform theory. And then there's 2 other points which are interesting. One is that when they cut it apart, they saw its lungs, which of course means it did not spew up its lungs, because it had to have been its stomach that threw up. But, and the lungs were described as one being longer than the other. And this is an interesting fact that a friend of mine named Scott Martis, who's a cryptozoologist, pointed out, that with mosasaurs being descended from snake-like creatures and monitor lizards, that would actually make sense, because snakes are anatomically proven to have one lung that is longer than the other. Mm-hmm. And the fact that these whalers, who are not scientists, of course, would come, document something like that, seems a little far-fetched, right, that they have that type of knowledge.
Now, sorry to interrupt you, but what functionality-wise does that do for a creature to have one lung longer than the other?
It's just a matter of an evolutionary adaptation of not only being forced to cram organs into a body that has become more and more elongated over time. Mm. So if you're descended from a snake, for example, or snake-like lizards, monitor lizards, etc., it's just a matter of you have these long lungs that are designed to hold a lot of air. And sea snakes have the same thing. Sea snakes have lungs, the longest proportion of lungs of any snake, actually, with that. But they have that alternate elongation, one lung being longer than the other. Hmm. What really sealed it for me, however, was, and this is a uniform description, this accounting's been around for 170 years or whatever it is that they described the tail as coming almost to a point and terminating, though, in flat, firm cartilage. And we know now, and have only discovered that in the 21st century, that many species of mosasaur had these shark-like caudal fins, these lobes on their tails. Their tail was not just like a crocodile's tail or something like that. They had a forked tail with this cartilage in it that helped them swim, like an inverted shark's tail. And there is no way that whalers from 1852 would have known about this,
right,
unless they thought that they'd seen it firsthand. So for me, that's pretty much the clincher that they came across some sort of prehistoric marine reptile of some kind and killed it. It's a fascinating accounting.
You touched on this a little bit, but they ended up chopping the head off and they tried to preserve it in salt. And then they also, and is this something that you do think they actually did try to do? And then they took the heart and one of the eyes and they put it in some liquor to also try to preserve it in the hopes of it making it home. And I know that at the end of the article, it kind of mentions that, the whole thing may be a hoax, but besides those two major points that you just brought up about the description, I find it strange that they would want to, so they wrote a letter because they knew they wouldn't be going to port anytime soon. They sent a letter ahead to the mainland, quote unquote, right? And why send a letter? And they didn't, the end of the story is the Monongahela, the wreckage was found in 1855. But when they wrote the letter, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming home. So I would think that if they would have sent the letter ahead, knowing that at some point they would have had to answer for, what they saw and what they came across, that's another, it lends more credence to the story. Like why, I get spinning fishtails, but why send the letter ahead?
You would be really sinking your career.
Yeah.
A laughing stock if you couldn't back that up.
Right.
And I think that's like you said, it's an indication because also these men did the impossible. They did something like got proof positive that sea serpents or whatever you call them exist. And since obviously there were no telephones or TV or anything like that, that would have been a deliberate thing on their part because when they got home, they would have had fame and fortune waiting for them.
Yeah.
People would have been in anticipation of the ship coming there. It would have been established fact that these people claimed. And as soon as they got there, news would have spread far and wide and the amount of fame, let's say, they got from their discovery would have been increased geometrically because people would have known in advance about it. Right. But you're right. They would have hung their careers out to dry by doing that. Of course, the ship did end up sinking mysteriously, whether it was destroyed in pack ice as people think, or let's be realistic, it's not impossible that this creature's mate might have, had something to do with it. I mean, you never know. Anything's possible.
Right.
But most likely it was destroyed by pack ice, like they said, while fishing Arctic waters and lost. And I know fragments, I think, of the ship were found. So it was definitely destroyed, but anything that they had on board would have gone down with it.
Yeah, and I know in the account it says that the head was starting to smell pretty badly, which we all know what that means. But can you imagine if they would have made it home with any bits of this creature that they dragged up? That would have been incredible.
Oh, it would have been stuff of legend. And we wouldn't be having this conversation because, these animals would have been known to have existed at this point. They would have been known to not be extinct, and there would be more of an effort to study them.
Love that story. Besides the 2 points, I'm like reading it. I'm like, why would they send a letter home? Because all of these guys it's not impossible, right? That they're like, hey, we got to come up with this fantastical tale. We'll be rich and famous and get all the women we want and all the booze we want. But you'd have to have the whole ship, without the flinching when they're telling the story and all the details spot on. So I don't know. It just seems like it would be a huge undertaking for a captain to go, let's spin a mosasaur story. Not that they would have known the name, but
the fact that they said that they preserved one eye makes sense because the other eye had a lance go through it. Right. So there's no holes in the story. And when I look for, like when I interviewed Paul for the man who spotted the Carnival Cruise creature, I had hours and hours interviewing him, and I would make it a point to not set traps per se, but just to make sure that there was nothing that jumped out at me as, this guy's making up this is a hoax. He's making up a story for attention or anything like that. There was no indication of that. So there's, in the story here with this whaler, you really don't have anything that jumps out as saying, these people were making something up.
Yeah, that's a great account.
They should make a movie about it.
They really should. Especially nowadays with the big budgets they've got, and they make things look quite believable. So yeah, that would be incredible. They've done Moby Dick. They've done 20,000 Leagues of the Sea. Time for the Monongahela 1852. All right. Well, let's talk about Paul and his working on the Carnival Cruise lines back in 2014.
And that's a very recent sighting, if you think about it.
Yeah.
We're not talking 1850s here or whatnot. So basically, long and short is that Paul approached me on my fan page on Facebook initially because he wanted to be able to talk to somebody about what he saw, and he wanted to talk to someone who would actually listen to him and not mock him and say he was out of his mind or making up the story, etc. Back in 2014 in the summer, he was a fitness employee working on the Carnival Cruise line ship Breeze, or Carnival Breeze. And he was on the upper deck, deck 12, if memory serves. He saw a small group of people staring at something over the side of the ship. They called him over and asked him what he thought it was. Paul saw an enormous sea creature swimming along parallel to the ship. It was, I believe he saw it for about 30 seconds, and they watched it, tried to figure out what it was. They could not determine what the animal was, but he said that he had plenty of experience from the ship during the course of his employment, different areas, that he knew it wasn't a whale and he knew it wasn't a shark. He'd seen all of those. He described it as being a shiny blackish color, like a manatee, but shiny blackish with very smooth skin. And the portion of it that he saw, which he believed to be its upper back, neck, and head, was a full 50 feet in length. Now that's an enormous animal.
Mm-hmm.
He said the head was at least 10 feet long. The neck was of similar size. He said that it was very massive. He used the word robust several times. Broad, incredibly powerful looking. Almost like it had trapezius muscles. It was broad, sort of like a turtle, but with a turtle with a crocodile-like head. And it was swimming along just under the surface and barely breaching the surface here and there, keeping pace with the ship. He said it was very leisurely. And I did research on the cruise lines in terms of the speed they travel at, and their normal cruising speed is at least 20 miles an hour. And this thing, he said, effortlessly kept pace with the breeze, Carnival Breeze, for a while. He said its head and neck, portion of its head and neck came up, and he believed it was breathing at that point, taking air, because the water around its head turned white. And he said it was like almost like a submarine, like it was so big that the water would run off of its skin. And he saw its head and neck. It put the head and neck back under the surface of the water, kept cruising along, and then eventually it sort of like just slowly veered off and it disappeared. He said he had no idea what it was. Everyone who saw it confirmed it was something very wondrous, as they put it, but they couldn't identify it. And he actually said he got a picture of it with his cell phone, a quote crappy picture as he put it, and he proceeded to lose his cell phone in a bar, I think at one of the following ports, and it was obviously gone with the wind at that point.
Yeah.
But that's the main thrust of this story. And then he and I started, of course, playing 20 questions, or in this case, 200 questions with him to try and get to the bottom of what it was he saw.
Now, let's cover this before we get into the description of it and breaking that down a little bit more as you did in your interview with Paul. He was the only one that actually had his phone on him at the time, right? None of the other people that saw this thing even attempted to get a picture.
Not as far as I know. He said he was the only one that had his phone, and that was because he was an employee. This is the upper deck of the ship, and I'm not familiar with the precise anatomy of the breeze, but the upper decks where I've typically been is like swimming pools, jacuzzis, that type of stuff. It's not uncommon, especially 3 years ago, phones weren't as waterproof as they are now, for people in bathing suits to not have a phone with them all the time. But it was a handful of people, and that is true. I mean, I questioned him intensively on that. With the exposure that the incident has gotten, I am hoping that at some point one of the other witnesses, the people that was there, will come forward, or it's remotely possible that, I mean, a long shot, but you never know, where somebody who might have had been out on the balconies of the ship might have actually taken a picture of this thing.
Yeah.
That's why I saw it. You know, that would be obviously fantastic because we have direct evidence to go along with it. Or maybe the person that found his phone and threw it out. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a huge credit to you, Max, because, and guys, when you go to the website and you look at the account, Max really went through every plausible creature. You said you even showed him the rare beaked whale, which I had to look up because I didn't know what one of those looked like. You went through every possible scenario of, okay, you know, maybe it could have been this or this or this. And Paul, in most cases, was like, no, that's not even close to what I saw. That's absolutely not what we all saw that night. So you did a really good job of trying to covering the bases. And you kind of ended up saying, because I think it was no one saw the four flippers, which didn't really maybe mean much because it might have been underneath the creature and they were in the water. It tends to eliminate it being a plesiosaur. So to you thought that a mosasaur would actually be a little bit more likely.
Yes, like you said, I went through a rogues gallery, let's say, of possibilities, trying to eliminate like they say, when you eliminate everything that is possible, you end up with something that's impossible. Mm-hmm. So I threw sperm whales at him, whale sharks, basking sharks, looking for dorsal views, everything I could find, different types of whales, beaked whale, etc. And everything, he was so emphatic about the fact that this thing was as long as a whale, but much more robust. It wasn't long and slender like whales that would be next to like a finback or a blue whale or something like that. It wasn't a sperm whale. It was something unknown. And he was quite emphatic about the shape of the head and that it looking like an enormous crocodile or alligator, elongated but broad. He emphasized the smoothness of the skin and the width of the creature also. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I did a follow-up with him. And I decided that I was going to try, based on his exact description, to kind of like narrow it down. And I did this sketch myself of this shadowy form based on his sketch, because he did a drawing for me that he had sent me of what he'd seen. But I did a drawing based on that but silhouetted to give it the blackness and taking into account that this thing would be at least partially submerged. And I created something that had this head, this neck, and then these wide, almost muscular-looking shoulders, mm-hmm. and then it kind of fading under the surface. And he was very excited, and he said, "That is it. You hit it exactly on the head. That's 100% what I saw." And then I did the connected dots thing, eliminating water, compensating, let's say, for the water clarity, and showed what this would look like without it descending into the depths and losing visibility as it went deeper down. And what you're left with is this very robust, as he said, mosasaur type creature, where what he was initially interpreting as shoulders would be a pair of four flippers that were actually like diving planes being, angled to mm-hmm. out to the sides, let's say, to help this animal maintain its position at the surface. And if a mosasaur would come up to the surface like a crocodile would, which makes sense. It's not going to fully come to the surface. If it's just coming up for air, there's no need for that. It would come up to the surface, the head, the neck. You might see some upper back or part of its back. The rest of it would be draped down and just the tail would be going back and forth as it kept pace with the ship. So it made sense that's the only thing that's put the way that I could think of that it could be. Oh, and he also said it did not spout like a whale. Mm-hmm. When it came up for air. That was another interesting point. he described it, like I said, as the water turning white around the head. And I've looked at videos of sea turtles coming up for air and crocodilians and things like that. And a lot of times they will release a lot of air that they're holding as they approach the surface or right below the surface as they're coming up to breach. And if you think about the sheer size of what he's describing, this animal, those bubbles would be so small by comparison that it would look like the water would turn whitish around its head.
Something else that stuck out that Paul said is he said it had traps, which is short for trapezius, of course. And if no one knows what the trapezius muscle is, it's actually a four-headed muscle, but the second head of traps comes up. It can sometimes, if they're very developed, go Google Jay Cutler or something, they can be very developed and actually look like they're standing out to the front a little bit. So when someone has very defined and they're working on their traps a lot, those things do stand out. So that would lend, credence to this fact that this thing is maybe really stealthy, moving very quickly, moving those foreflippers a lot to angle itself, like you said, to where it needs to go. Very powerful creature, obviously. Yeah,
Paul is an athlete, so he would definitely use the term traps. I mean, he was working in a fitness capacity for the cruise line. But if you look at a shark, or in this case, what would be most historian, let's say, an orca's pectoral fins, you'll see how those fins extend out to the sides, like I said, like diving planes, and the animal uses those to control pitch, etc. So if it's going to raise or lower its position in the water column, those fins are integral for it to do that. So this animal was keeping pace for the ship, and it was maintaining its depth, let's say. So those front fins would definitely, those pectoral fins would have been extended in some manner, possibly angled down a bit. I don't know the exact positioning for that, but for the water flow, for it to hold position and suspend like that, let's say.
And how long did they watch this creature for, Max?
I believe he said it was at least 30 seconds that they were standing there watching it. I, of course, would have been sorely tempted to dive 120 feet from the deck land on its back. Like Tarzan,
Oh, I can see it now. Then you really want somebody to get a picture of that.
Get this on video. I'm only going to do this once. And the animal looks up, sees you coming, and just opens its mouth. And he's gone.
And there goes Max. Hey, try it again. Yeah, that is, I didn't even think about that aspect, Max, is that maybe some other folks on other levels of the ship were watching and did in fact get a picture, and maybe they come across this story that you and Paul have kind of cracked open and are sharing around, and maybe we can get a decent shot of the thing. That would be pretty amazing. I will post, of course, links to all that we have talked about this evening, of course the website, but the separate stories as well, because not only is the initial talk really important, but so is the follow-up, because in both of those, you're really trying to hammer down on, hey, Paul, maybe it was this, hey, maybe it was that, and here's some different drawings, and you went through several permutations before, like you said, he got really excited about that one, which, oh my gosh, when you guys see it, you're going to go, oh, yeah, that doesn't really look like anything that we have in our nice little books on what's in the ocean right now, right?
No, I really believe he is sincere, that he saw what he says he saw. There doesn't seem to be any other explanation for it except for some sort of unknown, undocumented marine predator. And based on head shape, et cetera, I mean, he didn't see teeth or anything like that, but it would probably be a carnivore of some kind. It has to be something along the lines of these animals that are reported. Everything from the whaler to stuff that they're sighting off New Zealand, except that this animal, and this would, in my opinion, explain its brazenness for pacing a ship like that, this animal would probably be like the alpha male, let's say, of its species. This thing would be the ultimate marine predator. It's not afraid of anything, including a ship, and it's just doing its thing.
We should hope that's the alpha, right? If there's anything bigger than that, holy smokes. I mean, did this make Paul did he get freaked out at all? Did he say, "Oh, I'm not, now that I've seen that, I'm not going in the water. I'll stay on the ship"? I mean, did it change his perspective at all?
Well, we discussed, for example, the super predator incident, the animal that reportedly ate a 10-foot great white shark years back off the coast of Australia in the Bremer Canyon. And when I mentioned that, he said, a 3-meter shark would be a snack for what I saw.
Oh my God.
And he said, you would not want to be in the water with this thing. He said, I believe that it was just kind of doing its thing and at the same time keeping an eye out for either rivals, which are rivals of its own kind, or lunch. It probably came along and started pacing the ocean liner looking for an opportunity. Is there something edible on this ship?
Yeah.
And there is, interestingly enough, in one of my novels, I think it's Cronus Rising Plague, there is an incident in there where a pliosaur keeps pace with an ocean liner.
Oh.
And there's like on deck 5 or something like that, there is a young man with brain cancer who was looking to commit suicide by jumping, and his girlfriend is trying to talk him out of it. And just as she manages to do that, this thing that they see and they photograph extensively, it dives down and they think it's gone. It comes up like a missile from a submarine out of the water and snatches this poor guy right off the railing.
After he changed his mind. That's terrible.
Yeah, he was all excited about a new lease on life and then, making money off of this, discovering this creature and maybe they could try some new cancer treatments that the insurance wouldn't cover and what, and then all of a sudden, and he's gone.
Took care of that and handled that business right there and made the decision for him. Yeah, so that's a perfect segue. Let's just touch on your Paleo-Fiction a little bit and tease some of those books so that people can pick those up, which I will also make sure to link so people can easily find them.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Well, the novels I write, book 1 was called Cronus Rising. And Cronus Rising is basically, I don't like to give a lot of spoilers. It explores the possibility of what would happen if a prehistoric marine predator was able to survive to the present, but in an enclosed environment. And this is it's a spoiler, but in the book, there is what's called a caldera, Diablo caldera off the coast of Cuba. And this caldera has been around since the Cretaceous. And a caldera, for people that don't know, they're listening, is basically either an extinct or dormant volcano that has blown its top, let's say, ages prior, and most of it is gone. So all that's left is a bowl-shaped depression. And in the story, what I did was during the Cretaceous impact, Chicxulub, where the asteroid struck, I had a 1,000-meter tidal wave inundate this caldera and basically turn it into a giant saltwater aquarium, imprisoning a lot of prehistoric marine life for 65 million years. Fast forward to the present, and a tremor causing this caldera to split open briefly releases a enormous pliosaur and a few other marine nasties into our oceans. And what happens is the exploration is not just the havoc that this creature would inflict, let's say, as it works its way up the coast of Florida, attacking whales, sinking boats, eating people, etc., but the long-term effects of that on our predator-depleted oceans. And what I mean by that is, if this animal was able to breed and multiply, for example, human beings, courtesy of the horror known as shark fin soup, have slaughtered millions of sharks for their fins. Untold millions. We wiped the great whales almost to the point of extinction. I mean, 90% of many populations are still gone. Mm-hmm. So if you release this marine predator into an ecosystem where it has no competitors, its young will have almost no competitors, then what happens to the ecology of the seas? And that was something that I explored from the book into the next book, where it did have offspring and their survival rates were increased dramatically because nothing was able to feed on them, and then their populations exploded. So the series goes on. This book 2 in it is called Cronus Rising Kraken, which delves into it's 30 years into the future, and what has happened to the world's oceans with these creatures all over the place now. And humanity is now forced to try and take back control of the seas from prehistoric marine life. And then there are other books out there also. There's one called Diablo, which explores the Diablo caldera eruption and what was going on in the caldera when this happened, which was very popular. And the last one that came out was Kronos Rising Plague, which also explores what in the book is called Cretaceous cancer, and which shows the possibility of prehistoric marine life being locked up for so long, having primeval pathogens that human beings have no immunity to. Mm. So you risk the possibility of a plague that, I don't want to say turns people into zombies, but basically is like rabies on steroids and is easily spread and is beginning to work its way across the planet, starting in places where you have a lot of fishing villages, countries, island countries that rely on the sea for much of their economy. You know, you catch and kill one of these creatures, even a small one, and you eat it. You're obviously spreading bacteria, but even a fish that might have been bitten by one and just got nicked and didn't get eaten, and you catch it and you cook it, and next thing you know, it's spreading and spreading and spreading. So it's just fascinating to explore these different aspects of what would happen if we had prehistoric life just let loose into the seas.
Yeah, it's an interesting twist, but you never know, right? I mean, look at what Paul saw in 2014. You never know.
Absolutely.
Well, Max, you are welcome back anytime if there's any updates or cough, cough, you want to talk about things with wings or, God,
it was such I literally remember walking into the house and sitting down and going, did I just see that? And I had to ask my little girl, you saw it too, right? And she was like, oh yeah, this and this and this and this. And she was like, for days she couldn't sleep because of it.
Oh man. I was going to ask if that traumatized her or.
Oh, she wasn't traumatized at all. She was.
Oh, she was excited.
If you knew the whole tale, you would realize why she would be so excited. But let me ask the powers that be if they're willing to let me stick my neck out, so to speak, and we'll talk.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate even considering.
It was my pleasure, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. But nobody knows who that is.